Hello and welcome to the third part of our training plan overview. So once again, it's Renny Borg here from Champions Everywhere. I'm going to take you through it. If you've been watching part 1 and part 2 of this series, you probably noticed that we got cut off rather rudely at the end of part 2 as we hit the 15-minute limits with these videos. What we were talking about, we were starting to delve deep into how to use the kind of central piece of information in your training plan, which is expected pace, duration, and distance. And the point I was making just as that video ended, and which is a great place to start for us here, is the most important column. So you have a training plan in front of you, and you have already been through the pieces of information we've discussed previously. You know what type of period and phase this week is, which tells you something about the training. You know the dates, you know how to use the priority, you know the overall goal of the week, and you have familiarized yourself with the workouts, and if you haven't, you've clicked them and gone to our website to read the description. You know what the best time of day for performance means, you know how to use the suggested route type, and you know how to read the totals at the bottom. So really, at this stage, you're ready to really jump into the thick of it, and it's very tempting then to say, well, okay, so my workout today is 94 minutes and it's a long run, and I can see the plan expects me to run 19.2 kilometers in this case. As I mentioned in the earlier video, if you're a mileage person or use imperial units, that's something that we would build into the plan, so you would see in the units that you prefer. And finally, that the expected pace is 4 minutes and 53 seconds per kilometer. But obviously, you're not a machine, you're not a robot, and no matter how good our algorithms are, they're never gonna exactly match this. You can of course go out and hit this exactly if you're very precise, and that will happen from time to time. But it's really only something that's recommended when you first of all take care of the most important aspect of the training. So for every type of session there is, at different times of the years and the different phases, something else is most important. So in the early days of training, like in the general phase which we have here, by and large it's most important to build endurance. Now in this case we can see that because this phase had a mixed focus, that it's not just about long distance endurance, there's a few other things that we are training, but it's all related to it. So when you are building that in the early days, it's really important that the intensity is right. So we could go out, of course, and say, well, I'm going to run these 94 minutes at this exact pace, and I'm going to do it if it kills me. And that's obviously not what we want, because this workout is meant to be something that builds you up rather than pulls you down. And it's meant to be a workout that really stimulates and stresses the aerobic system, the aerobic energy system, and the system that burns mainly fat in the presence of sufficient oxygen. You don't really need to worry about all those things, but you do need to worry about this field here called perceived effort. So perceived effort is again clickable, so if you click the cell here, you can actually see the link. You're going to be taken to an article about rate of perceived effort, and you can read all about what do the numbers mean, what would they feel like subjectively, how would my breathing sound like. If you're a bit of a nerd, then it'll also tell you physiologically what will it roughly match, what type of thresholds and so on. So for the perceived effort here for the long run, you can see we're looking for an effort of 3 to 5, and that's on a scale of 1 to 10. So it's the modern modified Borg scale, it's called. Just if you're interested in history, the original scale went from 6 to 20. And that gives you a very, very good idea of how intense should this type of running feel. So you can see as some of the workouts that are slightly higher intensity, like the out and back, have 4 to 7. So it's colored yellow. And if we were to show you graphics, as we will in future videos in this series, of the phases that come later, so the related phase, the specific phase, the competitive phase, you will notice some red markers for perceived effort, when you're getting into interval training and things like that, where the intensity is very, very high. So this already gives you a good idea of how it should feel, and the bluer it is, the easier it should be. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily easy to keep going, because you might find it challenging to do 94 minutes, at any pace, but at least it should be a case that, your breathing should be fairly gentle, And if you were to rank the intensity there and then, if someone stopped you on the road and said, how would you rank it from 1 to 10? You should be falling into the 3 to 5 area. And just in case you're in doubt, we added the most important column into the plan as well. So you have one thing to look after before you look after anything else. So the very, very first thing you can do is say, well, what's the most important thing for my long run? And you can see it's heart rate. Now, if you don't train by heart rate, which is, again, information we collect as we take you into our system, these readings will be blank. If you want, we would just remove them, or we could keep them if you intend to get a heart rate monitor later. But by and large, we just blank them, and you would then go by perceived effort, and you would go by what's called relative effort, which is further out here, and I'll talk a little bit about how that's different from perceived effort. But most people today use heart rate monitors, and most of our clients would. So heart rate is kind of the lie detector, because we found that a lot of people today, a lot of runners today, have lost perception for what's easy, what's steady, what's hard, and they kind of dial into a standardized pace that they've gotten used to, and it's actually just a little bit harder than it should be quite often. Now, the opposite happens too. So we get athletes, often serious athletes, in who are always running a little bit too easy on their long runs and their medium runs, but that's rarer. So for most people who come in, this is a lie detector to keep the intensity down a little bit. So you can see for this athlete in question, the suggested range, so the heart rate minimum, which is the first column, is 141, and the heart rate maximum is 155. The reason that range, we will talk in future installments of the series about how we calculate that, so that you can buy into the logic. But for the moment, just know that it's based on the information that you give us, and the more accurate information you can provide us, the more accurate heart rates we can give you back in return. But the system we use is very, very good. So if you go and have a laboratory test done, we often see that it correlates really, really closely with what we would have calculated just using the formulas that we have. So in this case, you want to go for the long run. You want to be running for 94 minutes at a heart rate between 141 and 155, and that's the case for this athlete. So for your plan, and if you're looking at that at the moment, if you already purchased one, it will of course be different. For some workouts like the out and back here, you can see that it's more important that we get the relative effort right. So the relative effort, I'll talk about here in a second, is out there on the right hand side, but different workouts have different focuses, but remember, it's the most important thing. So that just means that's the thing you want to nail for the workout. So if everything else goes wrong, stick to that. But it doesn't mean the other things aren't important. So although in the case of the long run, that we want to hit this heart rate, and that's the first thing you dial into. So you go out and run, ease into the run as we discussed in part 2, for 5-10 minutes, as a kind of informal warm-up in the long run. And of course, during this time, the heart rate can be lower. In fact, it's usually a good idea to just kind of switch up through the gears. And you know that you're aiming for 94 minutes, but we have ranges for everything. If we look at the duration ranges, if you're tired, we're kind of saying to you here, maybe just run as little as 80 minutes. And if you feel really, really good and you feel like running a bit more, it's no harm running 103. But of course, if you feel super good and you run 104 minutes, it's not going to ruin the plan. And if you feel really, really absolutely awful and you say, well, I just can't do it today, I'm just going to go out for 40 minutes super easy because I feel terrible. That's the right thing to do because you're listening to your body. It's not that it shouldn't become an excuse to never follow the plan every time that, you're just a little bit out of sorts. But generally, you need to trust your body and not be a slave to the plan. The plan is there as an aspiration, but at the end of the day, no one can predict how your energy levels are even tomorrow, not even the best coach in the world. So it's really, really important that you don't treat it like a holy book. You're really flexible. So the ranges are just there to kind of encourage that behavior. But even the ranges, you can move a little bit, further down or further up. Although I will say, generally, don't move much further up than prescribed, because it's very easy then to go into overreaching, especially early on in the training when you're still quite enthusiastic and the fatigue hasn't accumulated yet. We're trying to get the maximum results from the minimum effort so that we can build sustainable progress rather than trying to take you to the very limits immediately of what you can do. And then after maybe 5-6 weeks, we've burnt you out, or we might get some quick results. The first training cycle is great, but then it just starts to fall to pieces, and a few years down the road, you're a train wreck. So that's what we're trying to avoid here. And a similar logic you can apply to the paces, and again, there's ranges there. So as I mentioned in part 2, this is your estimated pace for a flat, windless course. So if the terrain is difficult, if there's strong headwinds, and if you feel in any way off, maybe you're a little bit more fatigued than you should be, not as recovered as is ideal, maybe you just had the flu last week, then obviously this pace is not going to match very closely. And if you go on really hilly terrain, it's also not going to match very closely. So that's just something to keep in mind when you use these ranges. And in the early stages of training, you can see that pace is never the most important thing, because we are trying to hit the right intensities for the right durations rather than forcing the pace. The pace should be a side effect. So in a way, what you should look at is the time on your feet. That's the input. The pace is just an output. And that goes for the whole general practice period. But you'll see as you move into the specific period, that'll start to change a bit, because we'll actually have to do some workouts where we say, well, this is the pace you're hoping to run at. So now we're going to have to hit it. And okay, if we then see after a few weeks that when you force yourself to hit that pace, things are not going very well, then we have to readjust the goals, because clearly the body isn't really able for what it should have been able to if we had, based on the data that we have on you. So in the beginning, just use this to look at after you've done your run. Don't obsess about it while you're out there. So you can go home and say, oh great, I ran 94 minutes today. My heart rate was 144 on average, but my pace was actually 5:10. That's slower than even the slowest here. But what you can do then is we'll say, well, the range here actually allows me to run a little bit faster. So maybe next time I'll push the heart rate up a little bit more so I fall in this range. That would be a very intelligent way to use the information here. Whereas, as I said, the bad way is to go out and say, I'm already running at 155, that's the max of the zone, I'm only running at 5, and I really want to hit the 453 precisely, and then you push up into 160 heart rate, and suddenly you have a completely different workout. So that's the word of warning in how to use these, and the same applies for distance. Now, by and large, we are more interested in our training system in duration and intensity, and then distance and pace we just treat as a side effect. But there are certain workouts where it's important to hit a specific distance, because we're trying to practice that particular distance, such as in a time trial. And you will see that, for instance, there's a MAF test in the example that we have here. So that's the max aerobic function test, which you would, if you were in our system, you would have been asked to do that usually before you start training. And it's a 5-mile time trial, which is 8 kilometers and 50 meters. So you can see here that the instructions in workout details, which is the furthest field on the right, says time trial of 8,050 meters and in 38:55 at a heart rate of 143 to 145. So you can see it's much more accurate for the MAF test, the heart rate. And then you run easy after time is up. And you can also see out here, if you go to the workout, that this particular type of activity has a specific warm-up, and that's because the MAF test, as an example, only works if the body's properly warmed up. If you don't, then you don't get the right result. Now, obviously, with the MAF test, you're running for heart rate, so that means the 38:55 that is scheduled here, that's just the estimated result, and you shouldn't be pushing through the heart rate to hit that. Which is, again, it's reinforced in the plan. So we hope you can't really get it wrong. It says the most important thing is heart rate, and that the workout details tells you stay between 143 and 145. But of course, if in doubt with our plans, then you mail your coach if you're on the supported package. If you're not on the supported package, you'll still be a member of our Insider Facebook group, so you can post your question there, and we'll be only happy to answer it. So that finishes this third part of the training plan, which was probably the most interesting thing. I hope will be the most interesting thing for most of you, how to use pace, duration, distance with the heart rates. So in the next part of the series, we are going to go into workload, relative effort, and then just wrap up around this to finish the series. And that should give you everything you need to understand everything in the training plan. And then in future installments of this series, we are really going to dive deep into the areas in kind of little 5-10 minute videos if you're really, really interested in a particular area such as pace or how do you calculate heart rates. So I'll see you in part 4.